All right, I am back here talking New York Jets football on the Just End the Suffering podcast. Joining me today, we talked to him back in the offseason. Talked to John Butchko of Gangrene Nation. John's back with us. John, how are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Doing okay. I mean, I watched the Jet game today. It was very interesting. They had some momentum on offense. Defense struggled a bit. What did you take away from today's Jet game?
I was frustrated by this game. Now, I think this has been a different game. I think this was a different game than we've seen the last couple of weeks because since the bye, the Jets played 4 games prior to this one, and they had been blown out in 3 of them. But this team they played today is not that great. The Dolphins came into this game 3-7. They've been really underperforming this season. And I thought the Jets had some opportunities to take advantage of in this game. The Dolphins had made a lot of mistakes. Now, the Jets made a lot of mistakes too. And I think that the difference between playing, say, a Miami and Buffalo last week is that when you make mistakes against Buffalo, you get blown out. Whereas you make mistakes against Miami, those don't necessarily destroy you. But, I look at this game, I look at the defense not getting stops in the second half. I look at the Jets twice going to the red zone and not getting points. And then the third time they got it to Miami's 36-yard line and not getting points. Difficult for me to not look at this and be disappointed and feel like the Jets maybe squandered an opportunity to get their third win.
Yeah, I think the thing that bothers me more is the fact that the Jets got off the field twice and then had penalties basically extend those drives to Dolphins that led immediately touchdowns. There's the John Franklin Myers roughing the passer, or I believe it was a pass interference on the second one. So those things I think you don't want to see that. You can get beat by talent, I get it, but making mistakes like that is not great.
Yeah, and I think heading into the season, I remember back in the spring when we chatted, I mentioned that this season is not only about wins and losses for the Jets, it's really about progress as much as anything. But this is the first game in a stretch where there are some very beatable opponents. And I don't think that you can 100% say that progress is based on wins and losses because, look, this is a team that has a talent deficit in a lot of areas. But you can't completely separate the idea that progress is measured, at least to some extent, by wins and losses, especially when you have a stretch where the next couple of opponents are not that great. Now you have the Saints game in this mix, and then the Eagles are playing better. They're up in a few weeks, but this to me was like the beginning of a critical stretch of this Jets season to help us gauge how much progress this team is making. And this was kind of a disappointing start, I thought.
Yeah, for sure. Now you also got the quarterback question lingering over this because obviously Mike White had his moment. He got benched. Joe Flacco played decently today and expects to see the quarterback room back to Zach Wilson next week, as soon as next week if he clears whatever's going on with his knee, if he has confidence in it. So I think the question here we have to watch is like, what did Zach Wilson learn in his 4 weeks sitting on the sideline watching this offense being run and not trying to make the hero play and just take what the defense gives you? I'm curious to see how that goes for him.
Absolutely. And I think it comes down to whether or not Wilson's 100% for next weekend, because on paper, Houston Texans are a good way to ease him back into the lineup. And, as you mentioned, Joe Flacco wasn't terrible in this game, but it's not like Joe Flacco played so well that you say this guy has to start the next game. It's not like Mike White against Cincinnati where he goes out and throws for 400 yards. You're like, you can't bench this guy. I mean, Flacco was okay. I mean, Flacco was about as well as I think you could have expected from him, but he's obviously a guy on the downside of his career, and at this point, he's a backup. He's not a starter.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the Wilson thing, what do you want to see the most out of him going forward here? Because I think the thing I want to see is obviously if he, sees that the offense can run, if you just take what the defense gives you and not try and play hero ball every play.
That's a really big one because if you look at a number of Zach Wilson's interceptions, there's been a guy open, maybe a check down, something that was open underneath where he was trying to force the ball down the field. I'm hoping to see him a little bit more comfortable in the pocket. I think his reads have been an issue through the earliest part of his career. I think that there have been some suspect decisions. So I think in the pocket, there have been some moments where he's really struggled, maybe not climbed the pocket when he had an opportunity. So, I think all of this stuff, I think Zach Wilson's kind of two different quarterbacks right now. When the play breaks down, he could be a very exciting quarterback because, and this was most prevalent in the game against Tennessee that the Jets won, Wilson could make a broken play and turn it into a 50-yard gain. He could turn it into a touchdown. I think the more basic elements of quarterbacking have been a little bit more difficult for him to this point. Again, working in the pocket, making reads, making smart decisions. So if you could take the player who can create outside the structure of the play call and then add somebody who understands what he's doing in the pocket, now you've really got something. So you see the talent from Wilson, you see him flash it, but can he be the guy who, I think Robert Saleh has said this in the past, can he be the guy who hits the layups? I think you just alluded to that as well. It's not all about the big play. Part of it's just about taking what the defense gives you and understanding what the defensive concepts are and getting the ball where it needs to go.
For sure. And I think also the one thing, few encouraging things about today was that we had a lot of questions about Joe Douglas' rookie class from 2020, which has pretty much been a disaster with injuries and guys underperforming. The fact that you got good performances out of the rookie trio from rounds 2, 1, and 4 with Elijah Vera Tucker opening holes in the offensive line, Michael Carter playing well before he got hurt, and Elijah Moore having another big game. I think those three, have really been the stars of the rookie class this year.
Yeah, and another guy I'd throw in there, I'm not sure he had the biggest game today, but Michael Carter the second. I mean, you have four guys that I think who are playing really well. And, you may remember back in training camp, every single day you heard about how Elijah Moore was dominating and how Elijah Moore is going to step on and day one be great. And then he suffered that injury. And once we got into the season, he had a week in the concussion protocol. It seems like he's finally getting comfortable. And as much as anything, you started to see Elijah Moore come on the last couple of weeks. But what's been missing is like the big play, the game-changing splash play. And we finally got that on the long touchdown pass he caught from Flacco in this game. So, if you're looking for hope as a Jets fan, this rookie class has been really good. I think you said it right. The last year's rookie class, outside of Bryce Hall, the 5th-round pick, has been a bit of a disappointment. Some of it due to injuries, some of it due to underperformance. This year's rookie class is showing a lot of promise.
Oh, for sure. And I think one area that's clear that needs to be improved here is his defense. I know they had some injuries, especially losing Carl Lawson preseason was a killer, and they've had a bunch of issues at the linebacker position. But this defense, to me, there's just no talent on it outside of the front four. It feels like almost an expansion level of defense, which is really bad. And I get that defense is Robert Saleh's specialty, and Jeff Ulbrich was a well-regarded coordinator. But when I see the breakdowns of his defense and the fact that it looks slow and out of position, it's like there's not much you can really do.
Yeah, and that's one of the troubling things. Saleh and Ulbrich talk frequently about how they run a simple system so that their guys can play fast and always know where they need to be. I mean, how many times do you watch these guys and they're in the wrong spot? I mean, there were so many misdirection plays Miami ran in this game where guys were out of position. I think that there is a little bit of young talent at the corner position. I talked a little bit about Bryce Hall and Michael Carter the second, but yeah, I mean, the other corner slot, Isaiah Dunn had a brutal game in this one. He was beaten for a long touchdown because he was in the wrong spot. Safety position is the safety position. Ashton Davis has been, I think, a pretty big disappointment, the 3rd-round pick from a year ago. Now, part of this, as you mentioned, is due to injuries, not only Carl Lawson, but both starting safeties for the Jets are out for the year. So they're playing guys at safety who would probably struggle to make an NFL roster on another team, but they're just so banged up at the safety position. But yeah, you said it. The linebackers have been underperforming. Early in the season, I thought the linebackers were playing well, especially CJ Mosley, but I think his game has really regressed. Jared Davis has been a big disappointment this season. He did not play the early part of the season because he was injured, but he came back and last week had a bad game. Quincy Williams, I thought actually played a pretty good game against Miami, and he played a good game against Tennessee a while back, but he's a backup. I mean, he's more of a depth player. His performances between Tennessee and today were kind of inconsistent. So yeah, I mean, as much as anything, they got to upgrade the talent level.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that makes it tough to really evaluate Robert Saleh because he's not worked with a lot. I said at the top of the show, so like you're asking him to giving him Funyuns, ketchup, and French fries, and asking him to make a fancy souffle out of it. Not going to happen. But at the same time, there are things that are bothersome when you watch him, whether it's the clock management, especially, has been a big problem in terms of being able to flow of the game. Stuff like that is concerning to me.
I'll tell you the thing that bothers me, and I don't know how much of this you can put on Saleh and the coaching staff, but I feel like this is a worse team than it was week one. This is a young team. You're expecting them to get better as the season progresses, and it's just not there. And I know that they came closer this week to beating Miami than they were against Buffalo last week or the Colts 2 weeks ago or New England a little while back. But again, they had opportunities to do something in this game, and they kind of squandered them, I thought. This next stretch is a bunch of winnable games. You just hope that they get a couple of wins. Maybe one win helps build their confidence. I mean, I go back a couple of years ago, and I never bought into the idea that just going 6-2 in the second half of 2019 was really that big of a deal. But if you remember, what began that stretch was they beat the Giants, and that kind of got them on a little bit of a run that built them a little bit of momentum. And I've always felt like if they lost that Giants game, they probably would have finished like 2-14 or 3-13 that year. So hopefully, like they get a win next weekend against Houston, and maybe that builds their confidence. Maybe that gets them going a little bit in this easier stretch of the schedule.
Yeah, for sure. I think with Saleh also, I think it's interesting. We saw like the whole fiasco of Rex Ryan going public saying, oh, he's a terrible coach. He's not the right guy. Then today he sort of walks it back. And I mean, you want to like Saleh, but like, again, it's very tough to judge him because I don't think he's working with much.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think part of this is maybe expectations were a little too high for him, especially following Adam Gase. Obviously, Gase was a very unpopular hire from the day the Jets made him. And I think people spent pretty much 2 years looking forward to the day Gase would no longer be the coach. So you bring in Saleh, and there's always optimism whenever you hire a new coach. You think he's going to be great, part because you've never seen him fail. So he could be anything. He could be, he could be Vince Lombardi. Well, of course, every single coach has their own flaws, and Saleh's a first-time head coach. I think you had to expect that there were going to be some growing pains this season. He's still kind of learning how to do the job. So, all of this in mind, and also the Jets clearly decided to just do a total teardown. I mean, this is the youngest roster in the NFL. Up and down the roster, you're playing rookies, you're playing second-year guys. You don't really have many veterans there to provide stability. It was something the Jets kind of planned on, and I think the whole philosophy was, you know what, this year is going to be rough, but our guys are going to get a lot of experience, and maybe they'll be better for it in the long run. So, yeah, as you mentioned, it's tough on Saleh. I think whenever you're the coach of a losing team, a team that fans view as underperforming, especially in New York, you're going to be in the spotlight. But, he's still early in his career, and he's got a lot of obstacles.
Yeah, I also think in terms of this situation with the roster, I don't think the Joe Douglas factor gets talked about too much yet because he's had a lot of runway because he came in such a bad situation. And I think now going forward, because he's had some rough free agency periods, he had one good draft, one bad draft. Now he's got potentially 2 picks in the top 10, 4 picks in the top 50 next year, a lot of cap room. I think the price is going to be increased significantly on Joe Douglas, put a much more competitive roster together for 2022 than he had the last 2 years.
Well, I go back to what I said about Adam Gase. The best thing that happened to Joe Douglas the first 2 years was that Adam Gase was his head coach, because Adam Gase was there to take all the criticism. You never heard a word about Joe Douglas because everybody was so frustrated with the coaching staff. Now, the first year was really not Douglas's team. Mike McCagnon had built the team, and Douglas came in after the draft and after free agency. But yeah, as you mentioned, I think you would have liked to have seen more, especially with all the fanfare Joe Douglas came in with. I mean, Joe Douglas was as hyped as a general manager hire I can remember since maybe Chris Ballard, and before that, Scott Pioli with the Chiefs. I mean, this was a guy who was universally acclaimed as the next great GM. And it hasn't all been bad, but I don't think you're exactly where you'd hope you'd be at this point. So I agree. I think there is going to be some pressure on Joe Douglas this offseason. And look, this is where it all is. The Jets are going to have a fair amount of cap space this year, and they're going to have, as you mentioned, all this draft capital. You got to see big improvements very soon, I think, for Joe Douglas.
Yeah, the one thing I'll give him credit for is that he has done a fantastic job in terms of winning the actual trades where, like, he gets assets for things that you don't think they should be getting a lot for, like Sam Darnold, they're getting 2 more picks for this year, 2 ones for Jamal Adams, getting a 4th-round pick for Chris Herndon. Then that's all he had the battle. He still has to make the picks and have them convert and actually use his free agent dollars to get guys in here actually useful. That we have to see more of.
Yeah, and I'll give him credit because the first pick they got from Seattle for Jamal Adams, and I guess actually they used the 3rd-round pick they got for Adams to trade up. They got Elijah Vera Tucker with, so that's a positive. But yeah, it's like you said. I mean, I think a lot of the theories behind what Joe Douglas is doing is good. In free agency, I think we've seen with the Jets over and over that nothing destroys your franchise more like paying premium money for guys who aren't premium players in free agency. We saw it with Trumaine Johnson. We saw it with CJ Mosley, who, I mean, a lot of it's not CJ Mosley's fault because he was hurt and he opted out. But I don't know that CJ Mosley was worth the contract the Jets gave him. And, even Le'Veon Bell, who at one point was a premium player, the Jets rolled the dice when they signed him because he had not played in a year. So, I mean, I think if you look at the good teams in the NFL, they try to kind of avoid the monster free agent deals, and they try and find, I don't know if bargain's the right word, because you can spend money to try and bring in a quality player in free agency, as the Jets tried to do with Carl Lawson and Corey Davis this past year. But it's a smart approach. That's how you have to do it. You can't, the team, if you look, there's a direct correlation between the teams who spend the most in free agency from year to year and losing teams. And the other thing I'll say about Joe Douglas is that he does do a good job of collecting draft capital. I think that's one thing his predecessor struggled with quite a bit. The best teams in the NFL at drafting tend to be the teams with the most picks because the draft is fraught with randomness. I mean, I don't even know how these guys do it, where you're essentially trying to project the next 10 years of a guy who's 21, 22. There are so many variables at play. And the teams that are the best at the draft, whether it's Baltimore, where Joe Douglas came from, Green Bay's always been a solid drafting team. They always have extra picks. They build in a margin for error. So a lot of the big picture stuff looks pretty good with Joe Douglas. It's just that's only part of the process. There's having a good plan, and then there's executing a good plan. I think the having a good plan part, Joe Douglas has done well. The execution has left something to be desired to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, they still have, at this point, 7 games left in the season. You said plenty of winnable games. They got the Texans coming up. They got Miami again, Jacksonville. Games against New Orleans and Philly are winnable because those are not superpower teams here. So what do you want to see out of this team down the stretch?
Well, some wins, obviously. I guess that's number one. But you want to continue to see the rookie class make strides, especially Zach Wilson. Go back to what we said earlier about Zach Wilson playing smarter, being better within the pocket. I mean, so much of these last few games are going to be about the extent to which Zach Wilson grows. And I think as much as anything, you want to build some momentum heading into next season. Now, San Francisco, I know they've been kind of up and down this year. The whole theory behind bringing in Robert Saleh was, I think at least part of it was that Saleh came from a massive rebuilding process in San Francisco. You have to remember that their first year, they got off to a terrible start. They were one of the worst teams in the NFL, and they finished that year really strong. And it kind of laid a foundation for future success. Now, it wasn't a direct line because the next year, Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt, I think, the third week of the season. And I think, finished the season with the second worst record in the NFL. But I always felt like the end of that 2017 season for San Francisco kind of laid the foundation for the run that they made in 2019, even though it was a year delayed. Now, I don't think the Jets are a year away from the Super Bowl, but I'd like to see them build some momentum. I'd like to see young players continue to develop. I'd like to feel good heading into this offseason with all of these resources the Jets have to build their roster up and head into 2022 with confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously this week you can start off. They got the Texans here. They have to go to Houston. They have not won a road game yet this year. It's nice to see them actually do that. I know Houston's coming off a big win against Tennessee. Nobody thought they would have. So maybe you catch them at the right time. Like I'm a little high on themselves. So what do you think is the keys here for the Jets against the Texans, presumably with Wilson back under center?
Yeah, you said it right. On the one hand, do you get Houston when they're hot, or on the other hand, is Houston not good enough to string together 2 straight games? I think, you got to see Elijah Moore continue to grow. I think that you want to see a good performance out of Zach. I guess that's stating the obvious. The quarterback needs to play well. What a brilliant key to the game that is, isn't it? But on defense, they got to get this thing figured out. And as much as anything, it almost doesn't matter what the Texans do if this defense keeps playing like this. If you keep having guys out of position, if the defensive line doesn't generate a consistent pass rush, I honestly think going forward, this is more about the Jets than it is anybody else. This is a defensive line. As much as they have issues with linebacker in the secondary, there's legitimate talent on this defensive line. And I think it's been underperforming most of the season. So they need to get things going again.
Yeah, I also think my big thing would be I want to see the mistakes cut down significantly, whether it's the penalties, whether it's having situations where you're burning timeouts because you have too many guys in the huddle or delay a game, stuff like that really start cleaning up.
Absolutely. I mean, so many mistakes in this game. Joe Flacco takes an intentional grounding penalty. As you mentioned, there were issues with timeouts. They burned 2 timeouts on one drive in the second half, and that came back to really hurt them because they were kind of low on timeouts near the end of the game. Now, I'm not sure that necessarily made the difference, but yeah, I think as much as anything, that's what's frustrating. It's one thing to go out there and say the team played well. You know what? They just weren't good enough. We saw the Jets make a lot of mistakes in this game, and we've seen the Jets make a lot of mistakes over the last couple of weeks that are really just about them and have nothing to do with the opponent. So those are the things you got to cut down on.
Yeah, it's also frustrating too because they've not won a division game I think since 2019. So it'd be nice to actually get one of those in the win column for once.
Absolutely. I think the last division game they won was the final game of 2019. It was a game where Buffalo played their backups because they had already clinched their playoff spot. So I don't even know how much that one really counts.
Yeah, absolutely. John, thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, how can people follow social media, keep up what you're doing over at Gangrene Nation?
The website's gangrenation.com. I actually don't have a personal Twitter. I'm the one person on earth who doesn't have one. So just go to gangrenation.com. And I also host the Locked On Jets podcast. That's a daily podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. New episodes each day, Monday through Friday. You can find that where podcasts are found.
Yeah, and if you want to follow Gangrene Nation on Twitter, can they do that?
Yes, it's at Gangrene Nation.
All right, John, thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Looking forward to doing it again.